Welcome everybody to my channel. My name is Rainer. This is Rainier Books. This is Easter Sunday, April 17. Of course I say Happy Easter, Happy Passover, Happy Ramadan to all my Christian, Jewish and Muslim friends out there and around the world from Stockholm, Sweden. So let's get started. Good. And while I'm walking here on Södermannagatan, on Södermalm, one of the 14 islands that consist the main parts of Stockholm, that sort of made up the main parts of Stockholm, I can tell you that I finished one book last week, I think 2 days ago probably, and that is from the British professor Kehinde Andrews. The book is called The New Age of Empire, How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World. And this is I think it's a very important book for us to read, diverse who are interested in social issues and in racial issues as well, and who do think that Black Lives Matter. I think Professor Kehinde Andrews is telling his story in a bunch of 8 chapters where he is describing the history of the modern history of mankind, the history of the so-called West, and the wealth that the West has accumulated as a history, also the history of enlightenment that is exclusively based on things like genocide and racism, because capitalism is built on racism and genocide and on colonialism. So the reason why we are here in this beautiful country, for example, Sweden, which is one of the richest countries in the world, the reason why we are one of the richest countries in the world is that we and a bunch of other countries who call themselves rich, who are allowed to call themselves rich, have exploited and suppressed the rest of the world and have used them to get that rich as we are. And Professor Andrews has a lot of points there, and his very radical approach is something that we don't have to share in each and every sentence, in each and every chapter, but it's definitely something that we should think about. And I guess I have to go home now to be able to give you some quotes from the book. Hello again. Now I'm at home. It's Easter Monday, but never mind. But I want to speak a little bit more about Kehinde Andrews' book, The New Age of Empire, which he published last year in 2021 with Alan Lane, which is a part of Penguin in the UK, How Racism and Colonialism Still Rule the World. And this is another example of black radical thought. And all of you and all of us white people who are sort of trying to educate ourselves, who are trying to learn more about the racial divide, about racism and how we can overcome it, we should really read books like the one by Kehinde Andrews, which stands in a long tradition, stands pretty much also in the tradition of Ibram x Kendi, stand from the beginning, has a lot of similar thoughts about the Enlightenment and how racist Enlightenment was. And I found a very nice quote in this book here that says, basically, it's not a quote, but I paraphrase it, the key foundation stones upon the West was built. We always say that our nations, our societies are built upon science, industry, and politics. But the truth is that our societies and our wealth is built on genocide, slavery, and colonialism. That is what Kehinde Andrews is saying in this book. And a lot of talk about what's happening now in the United States. We have a lot of people, 78 million people, 77 million people voted for Donald Trump, and they are scared to death that in 2045 white people will be a minority in the United States, and now they're doing everything to sort of avoid that. Even the political power is shifting from the white people to brown and black people. And this is also on the background. It's also very important to realize that. And about the United States, which is the biggest and most important country funded on racism and built on racism, he writes a couple of very interesting things in this book. I want to quote page 31 here. The fairy tale representation of this history, with the hard-working Europeans bravely taming the frontiers, provides the necessary comfort blanket for people looking back today. Rather than being the heroes of this history, the new Americans built their nation on genocidal slaughter. To recognize this would mean honestly accounting for the racist foundations of the nation. And that is something that always strikes me when I hear in election campaigns in the United States, both Republicans and Democrats, they speak, it's a common core, it's a common sense to speak about the founding fathers as like gods from above who founded this great democratic nation. But no, it's not true, of course. And that's also something that Kehinde is writing about. It was the profits from the Atlantic that allowed Europe to come to dominate the globe, leading the way in industry and science. But none of this was possible without the genocide in the Americas. Europe could not spread into the West and allow the indigenous people to remain on the land. They had to be cleared away to create the blank slate on which the West could be built. And for all those people who are trying to be revisionist, who are against Black Lives Matter, who are against teaching the history of colonialism, of racism in the United States. Republican parents and organizations are trying to overthrow school boards and try to ban certain things from history books. You got to learn something, and this is, if you fly the flag for the West, then every last one of your heroes is drenched in blood. No amount of atonement can alter this basic fact. That's thrown in the face to us by Kehinde Andrews. And I'm a white guy, I am privileged. I live in a very rich country. I'm not a rich man in this country, but compared to the vast majority of people on this earth, I am a super rich guy, because I have bread, I can put bread on my table, I can pay the rent, I even have a camera to shoot YouTube videos with, I try to discuss with all of you people, so I am super privileged and I know it. But that doesn't mean that I have to hate myself, and that's, I think, something is wrong when American parents say, we don't want our children to hate their country, our children are taught to hate their country. It's not true. You have just to look the truth in the face. I'm sorry to say that, man, but that's what we have to do. We have to accept our history. We have to understand what is our history, what is the basic of our history. That's what we have to understand. And books from Kehinde Andrews and other people help us to understand that. As a German, I am part of a nation who committed the Holocaust, which is sort of looked at as the greatest and the worst crime ever in history. I still believe that it is the worst crime in history, but is it? Kehinde Andrews writes, the notion that the violence suffered by Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis is unique only holds true if you discount the suffering, torture, and brutality meted out to those who are not considered white. There is no questioning the horrors of the concentration camps, but to elevate the Holocaust to the status of primary evil done in the world has the added advantage of meaning that our eyes averted from the brutality that Europe inflicted across the globe. The Holocaust was the logic of empire brought into the heart of Europe. Kehinde Andrews is showing us also what China is. China as an example of a non-white power is doing right now in the world, like investing in African countries, but only in African countries that are mineral-rich African countries like Congo, Angola, and Zambia, where they provide money to build infrastructure while they at the same time sort of exploit and strip the natural resources of these countries. China, the non-white West, implying sort of by using methods and means that the West has used, they are trying to become richer and to become the world power number one. So there's this chapter about China called the non-white West, and then the final chapter, which every book of this kind needs, where we have sort of maybe also a possibility to overcome everything. There's also, if you see like in America, for example, or in the UK where we had Brexit, neither President Trump, Prime Minister Johnson, or Brexit would be possible without the support of millions of poor white people for agendas that are diametrically opposed to their interests. There is no way to understand this phenomenon separate from the racism that underpins society. It is not an issue of class consciousness, but the delusions of whiteness that have allowed the harbingers of the neoliberal apocalypse to rise to power. The African-American intellectual W.E.B. Du Bois has theorized about this, and he says that there is a public and psychological wage from the whiteness. Even though they were being exploited by the same people as African Americans, their status as whites gave them limited privilege, which they clung to. And that is one of the reasons how the ruling people have sort of instigated also racism as a mean to sort of part poor whites from poor blacks and poor brown and other people in order to reach the power, because they need the votes, they need the will, they need the power of those non-rich white people to rule with racism and against the minorities. Donald Trump also, of course, plays a role in this. Donald Trump's victory has been seen as an outlier because he's so ill-suited and unprepared for the role of president, but his election was decades in the making, says Kehinde. He is the poster boy for neoliberalism and the silver spoon in the mouth elite, posing as the friend of the people, and his election was driven by the same basic factors as we saw in Britain. Poor whites supposedly being left behind by multiculturalism, fear of the immigrants taking control, a wish to return to the glory days when racism could openly form public policy. Trump's embrace of law and order is the classic racialized language of the right, that the dark inner cities need to be heavily policed to keep the savages in the jungle in check. But what is the new age of empire being? The new age of empire still has so much racism instigated in the fabric of society. The new age of empire is based on moving away from formal colonialism, breaking down the power of the state and delivering racial exploitation through economic, not physical coercion. Kehinde is also warning for us liberal whites who are trying to understand, trying to educate themselves, trying to contribute to a better world. And he says the problem is that society is built on white supremacy that permeates every institution, intellectual framework, and interaction within it. If you have come this far and believe that white people offering a meaningful hand of friendship is the solution, then you have entirely missed the point. It is not the place for the oppressed to suggest a progressive role for those who benefit from their oppression. So then we have to take it. We have to swallow, we white people, we have to swallow some things here. But nevertheless, I think Andrews is on the right way. And he is turning back in the last chapter. He's going back to Malcolm X, the great American black activist in the 1960s and who was killed in 1965, and his speech, which I read for the first time after reading this book, which is called The Ballot or The Bullet. We're now in a phase in the world where overconsumption is killing the planet. Climate catastrophe, climate change is imminent. It's happening each and every year. The earth gets warmer. The glaciers in the Antarctic, Thwaites Glacier, Google that, is melting, and it will sort of rise the sea levels within the next 50, 60 years by 2 or 3 or 4 centimeters, which will lead to horrible consequences for a lot of countries, even for richer countries, but mostly for poor countries. So the planet is maybe on its way of becoming uninhabitable. If drastic action is not taken, we cannot reverse it. Solar panels, electric cars, planting trees are not enough to undo the damage that has been done. And this is damage that we have done by white supremacy, by colonialism and capitalism, says Andrews. Maybe it is in this moment, he writes, standing on the cliff edge of annihilation, staring into the abyss caused by Western so-called civilization, that the depth of the problem and scale of the solution can be grasped. Perhaps we can wipe away the illusions of progress based on the distorted vision of whiteness we are brainwashed into. This is the chance to refuse the next system update of imperialism, destroy the hard drive, and create an entirely new framework for the world's political and economic system. But make no mistake, whether sparked by revolution or tipped into collapse under its own weight, the West will eventually fall. Malcolm was right when he warned that it will be the ballot or the bullet, liberty or death,
freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. And as Kehinde Andrews finishes in the acknowledgements to this book with the 2 sentences, or with 1 sentence actually, it is: revolution is not just possible, revolution is essential. Thank you very much for watching this video. Bye bye.